Hey everyone, it's Jasmine from Jasmine's Astrology, but you can call me Jay. And for today's video, I'm going to chat about Venus. But before we get into it, if you are enjoying these videos, I would very much appreciate a like and a subscribe. It definitely helps this channel to get seen by people, but it's also, I don't know, it makes me feel good. It's a nice thing to do. It's a free way to support my work. If you do want to support my work further and monetarily, you can check out my website, jasminesastrology.com, for some consultations and other offerings that I have available over there. But a like, a subscribe, a share, it's free. There's nothing better than free sometimes. Okay, let's chat about Venus, because Venus is a busy gal this week as she heads into Gemini and then makes a couple of aspects with both Pluto and Saturn, all the while being in charge of Mercury in Taurus, who is slowing down and preparing to begin its next retrograde cycle. And I will have more on that upcoming retrograde in this month's episode of The Stars Turn, so stay tuned for that. But back to Venus. Venus will move into Gemini on April 11th, the very early hours of April 11th. And I had mentioned in the April overview video that I was intrigued to see how Venus might sort of soften the edges left behind by Mars's transit through Gemini, because I think after all that spiciness, after like the heaps and heaps of hot sauce that Mars delivered to us, or maybe the the spiciness, the saltiness too. But after all of that, it's just going to be really nice to get some sweetness from Venus. It might be that we are finally able to sort of come to a place of peace with whatever that Mars transit brought our way. However, something I sort of failed to really acknowledge in that video is that for most of Venus's time in Gemini, its host planet, Mercury, will be retrograde. So that might make things a little less straightforwardly soft and sweet. Now, Venus and Mercury will be in like what's called exchanging signs. So Mercury will be in Taurus, Venus's sign, and Venus will be in Gemini, Mercury's sign. So that could help to maybe possibly mitigate some of the weakness that Mercury is feeling while retrograde. But that sort of remains to be seen. I think the thing we can count on is those first 10 days of Venus in Gemini while Mercury isn't retrograde. And we should definitely take advantage of those 10 days as much as possible. Now, taking advantage, what does that mean? So being open to receiving all of that softness and that sweetness when it's on offer, and just soaking it up while you can, while the getting is good. So, that's going to depend on where Venus is in your chart, and the brand of havoc that Mars sort of wreaked for you while in Gemini. But let's say it's like your seventh house of relationships. So maybe you're able to reconnect and repair any bonds that experience some turbulence or friction or tension while Mars was in Gemini. Or maybe Gemini is your 12th house of like retreat and solitude, and Mars maybe brought a real intensity for you to your work behind the scenes, or even to your mental health. And, didn't really leave a lot of room for any of that rest and relaxation that we can sometimes take advantage of with 12th house transits. But Venus coming into Gemini, that might mean that you might find it a little easier to access that leisure and pleasure in those ways. So I do have a PDF that outlines all the houses and their topics, and you can grab your copy from a link in the video description and figure out where this Venus in Gemini transit is happening for you, if you didn't already feel it with Mars moving through that house for about a bajillion years. Okay, so in general, let's talk Venus and Gemini in general. This is a very sociable placement. It's fun, it's flirty, we're curious about other people. We actually want to have the chit chat and the small talk at parties. We're looking for interactions with people that provide us with some sort of information, some sort of input, some sort of stimulation on an intellectual level. Social media was definitely impacted by Mars's transit through Gemini, and I'm really curious to see whether or not Venus might be able to bring some sweetness and pleasure back to those platforms. Like maybe, hopefully, we could see less arguing on social media and more sort of coming together, more harmonizing, more bonding via technology. Personally speaking, Mars and Gemini really brought up a lot for me around social media and about like the burnout and the overstimulation that we can get from social media. And I had to take a step back. And while I have returned to Instagram, it's sort of still with a little bit of hesitation and caution. And I'm really curious to see whether or not Venus sort of smooths the edges over, helps me find a deeper sense of enjoyment out of the whole thing. So, worth looking out for. The one sort of caveat there, though, is that there could be some sugar coating when it comes to shared information. So we just want to keep our wits about us as we always should, make sure we're doing our due diligence in terms of critical thinking because something might look a lot better than maybe it actually is. Venus is sweet. It can sugarcoat. Now, with Venus and Taurus, we might have been a little bit more introverted in terms of where we were seeking pleasure. We're probably looking to things like nature and food or just being cozy on the couch. But with Venus and Gemini, pleasure really comes from a much more outward and extroverted input. It comes from being in conversation with others, from sharing ideas and laughter and joy. Venus and Gemini can be like sweet words and words of affection, but also humor in like a cutesy way, if that makes sense. So that's kind of where like the flirtation energy comes in. So it's not necessarily that we're making people double over with laughter, but we're saying things that like make them smile and make them feel warm and like, like they've got little butterflies in their tummy and just saying cutesy things, but like a little LOL or whatever. I never say LOL, so that's got to be the influence of Venus and Gemini. Because Venus and Gemini lightens the mood. It's lighthearted, it's cheerful, it's playful, it's lively, it's outgoing, it's bubbly, it's social. It's a very spring-like energy in terms of feeling. It's like it's got a freshness to it. It's full of potential and enthusiasm. We're more likely to try something to try something new. We're more open to trying something new, especially when it comes to the matters of pleasure and leisure. We're curious about those things and how they fit into our lives and where we might find more of them and how we can better integrate them into our daily lives. Now, in terms of how this shows up personally, again, that's really going to depend on where Gemini is in your chart. But in general, Venus brings improvements. It adds beauty. It enhances comfort within that Gemini space in your chart. It provides some ease and flow for making connections and compromises with the people represented by that house. So let's say it's fourth house for you. Gemini is on the fourth house. So it could be that your interactions with family, especially your parents, are just that much more pleasant than usual. Or maybe your parents themselves are having a much more pleasant time than was the case when Mars was moving through there. Or maybe it just means that you're sort of ready to spruce up a part of your house or redecorate in some sense. Or maybe Gemini is the eighth house for you, and you're somehow attracting money through other people. Your loans or your investments might get that added sweetness from Venus. Maybe your partner gets a little bit of a bonus at work. So moving on now, just shortly after the Venus ingress to Gemini, Venus will form a trine with Pluto in Aquarius at 0 degrees. So that's also happening on April 11th. And this is our first interaction between Venus and Pluto since Pluto has ingressed to Aquarius. But it's also the first interaction for Pluto in Aquarius with anything in Gemini apart from the moon. And maybe the moon hasn't been there yet. I would have to check my calendar, so don't quote me on that, but probably the moon, nothing else. Now, uh, so this is, it marks a bit of a pivotal moment to be sure. And it really speaks to the forming of a potentially really powerful connection. There's a very magnetic quality to this interaction, an attraction that feels really intense without being overwhelming or overpowering. And that attraction isn't necessarily sexual or even romantic. It could be, but it could be that you're really just vibing with someone on a purely platonic level over, a really over a shared interest that's really important to both of you, because this is happening in air signs. So I would expect that the connection would really be in that more mental realm, more of an intellectual connection, an intellectual attraction. There's just a real craving for intimacy on that mental and intellectual level. We're wanting to share ideas as a means of getting closer. Now, existing relationships can really benefit from this energy and that desire towards going deeper. And new relationships will likely get a really strong start in the area of, connecting like minds and sharing ideas and sharing viewpoints that are important. There's a general sort of craving for an exploration and even a redefining of what trust and loyalty means to you and how that plays out in your life. So there's really just a potential for a lot of depth to be created because, of course, trust and loyalty are so akin to intimacy. The more trust and loyalty we have from people, the more we can be open with them. And that really creates that depth in a relationship. And when you're vibing with somebody about ideas, you feel like they get you, right? You feel like you can open up to them. And so even though Venus in Gemini is really up for a lot of like surface interactions with like a lot of people, this trine to Pluto will really narrow the focus for just like a window of time where we are really drawn to going deep and getting a little intense with just a few people or even just one other person. And there's also a really transformative quality to Pluto. So I do wonder, if through these connections and these collaborations that we are able to transform our thinking or our perspective on what we went through during that Mars and Gemini transit. Later in the week, on the 14th, Venus will square Saturn in Pisces at 4 degrees. And this aspect is a little trickier, a little more serious, unfortunately. It is saying that, like, we need to put work before play, responsibility before relaxation. And it's not that we can't have that play and that relaxation, but, there are priorities and commitments that we've already made that we now need to uphold and follow through on. So we might feel like our good time on a Friday is a little bit delayed, but it will come. And, it could be related to whatever work you're doing or whatever goals you might have set for yourself in the Pisces part of your chart where Saturn is transiting. So that work needs to be attended to and cared for before you can go out and do the, fun and flirty socializing of Venus in Gemini. Now, Venus square Saturn is also really highlighting the work of being in relationships. I kind of see this as maybe a bit of a reality check after the Venus trine Pluto earlier in the week. Not that we were being fooled by the connections we were forming and strengthening, but now is the time to figure out whether or not that new or further developed connection is sustainable. What are the actual expectations for each person in the relationship, and are they realistic? The reality check could be around what's not working in a relationship, more likely in like a long-term relationship. So we might be thinking about like, what do we need to make more time for? Where are we maybe feeling too restricted? Maybe we need more curiosity from a partner with the Venus in Gemini part of it all. And maybe some of the tension could be eased through like watching a new show together or playing a new game together, having a conversation about topics that you might not normally talk about, just to sort of feed that Venus and Gemini desire for new input, new information, for being curious, for doing those new little things that feed you on that intellectual level. Now, Venus Saturn is about the obligations that we create when we decide to be in partnership. And then, the actual showing up and giving of ourselves to those people that we've decided to make commitments to. And part of an aspect like this can be sometimes realizing that we need to prioritize certain relationships over others. And in some cases, it could be that we realize we're just actually no longer available for certain connections. It could be altogether, or it could be that, we're going back to that expectations piece of like, actually, I can no longer provide this. And so we need to make adjustments to figure out, can we move forward, or has this sort of run its course in a way? So adjustments and choices that aren't super comfortable will likely have to be made. However, I do feel that, Venus is exalted in Pisces. And so in this sort of like conversation it's having with Saturn, I do think it can offer some softness and the potential for an overall positive outcome in the end, even if in the moment it does feel a little sticky and tricky and rough. But the decisions and the choices that we're making are going to benefit us in the future for sure. Like Saturn's choices, like the choices that Saturn forces us to make, typically make future us much happier than present us. So it's good for the long term. All right. Well, that's all I've got for you this time around. I hope you enjoy this week of Venusian influence. And let me know in the comments if you have any questions about anything I brought up today, or if you want to share where Gemini is in your chart and maybe how you're hoping this Venus transit will show up for you. I would love to hear about it. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you'd like more from me, again, you can check out my website, jasminesastrology.com. I am over on Instagram at jasminesastrology. And until we meet again, I'll catch you in the cosmos.